So thank you, Dr. Batra and the Business World team for organizing the day today and for inviting me to participate. It's nice to be placed in the value of good. I hope we live up to that. The value of good is going to be my takeaway, I think, from today. And of course, at NPCI, we manage the digital payments infrastructure from India, and I really like the topic that I was asked to speak on, which is digitization to democratization. And I started off saying, what is this digitization to democratization, right? What really is the difference between these two things? And the more I thought of it, it was very clear that digitization is really about creating the foundation, creating the fundamentals, creating the frameworks, whereas democratization is really what one can do with it. So at a very basic level, this could be termed as, to say that when you have documents and you electronify them or scan them or digitize them, that's just simple digitization. But what can you do with that thereafter? How does it really become useful to the user is where the game starts changing. And if we go back in time to pre-digital native era, look at email, right? So email would probably be one of the very first digitization of communication that we had. And it didn't get democratized till it became hosted for everybody. It became free for everybody. Anyone could, get an email ID. There would be a certain space of storage available for that email to be used. One could go to any cyber cafe and access your emails. You didn't even need to own a phone or a laptop in those days. And that was really an example of how digitization became democratized. And there are many examples of that nature. If I look at the payments world, checks became check truncation. We run check truncation actually, which is check clearing for India. But what is that? That's basically scanning checks and then clearing them in a digital form, though the check itself is still a physical instrument and gets dealt with as such. So that could be called digitization, but real democratization would be, UPI, which is really taking digital payments to every person, every merchant, every user, to really change the way in which they are able to buy goods and services. So I look at digitization as sort of what happens on the supply side, and democratization is what happens on the demand side. So supply side is a given, it needs to be there. Without the supply side elements falling in place, nothing much is going to happen after that. It's like laying the roads, and really democratization is like, creating all kind of vehicles that can now travel on the roads. So really creating the use cases, the applications, the services, and taking it to users for whom it will be truly beneficial. And I said, let's look at this with few lenses, having looked at what this broader definition is all about. So the first lens I thought we can look at really is a product lens. And when we look at a product lens, digitization is about creating common language. So productizing something is saying, hey, what really are the standards? What's the kind of protocol? What's the specification that needs to be followed? So that when various systems interact with each other, there is a common language that they are speaking to each other in. So whether it's network layer, transport layer, application layer, whatever have you, right? And coming back to payments, it's like the UPI specifications or procedural guidelines and so on that exist. So that really provides the foundation. And what really happens when we look at democratization is the kind of services that run on this, right? So it opens up a layer of innovation that can then be deployed based on the customer segments that really are being catered to. So it could be, for example, going back to UPI, we have the BHIM app on one side, very simple, focuses on payments, person to person, scan and pay, online payments, all that is great. And then you've got apps that really look at this like a whole super app, right? So you want to make bill payments, you want to load your FASTag, you want to like deep integrate with all kind of merchant experiences. So it's like creating an entire palace of payment opportunities there. So that's because every organization has looked at this in a different way and said, what sort of services do I want to offer? Who's my customer base? How am I going to offer these services? But that happens on the framework that is available. And that standardization of that framework is very important. It goes back to the point Dr. Batra made earlier about what we can do, from, let's say we've got the payment stack, and then, if you take it to a health stack and so on and so forth. But everywhere, it's that framework of standards that forms the base on which all other innovation thereafter takes place. And here, of course, there is personalization, there is user experience. If you look at user experience, it could be, what do I need to do to handle people who need a different language, right? So when we look at democratization, it's not just English for everybody. In a country like India, one will have to look at minimum of 10 languages to say, yes, I've covered most of the population, and then probably looking at 20, 25 languages to really get to the broader base of the country. So the hyper-personalization, opportunities around how UX can work, and the whole layer of services that work with it. The next lens I thought we can take really is the technology lens. And the technology lens, when we look at the base framework is about availability. When we look at digitized services, they just have to be available when you need it. And in the payments world, this is called success rate, right? So it builds trust. If you go and try your payments a few times and every time there's a problem, you're not going to really feel that you can trust that anymore. So similarly, across all services, having scale, and when we talk of democratization, we are obviously now talking of products and services that can cater to a very large population, something that can address 1 billion people in the country here. So we're looking at scale and looking at availability. On the bedrock of scale and availability, comes really everything that's to do with tech today. And this is the Silicon Valley of India, right? So I don't have to teach you about technology, but when we look at everything that's happening around open source, for example, I think the days of experimenting with technology, utilizing web services, utilizing a range of microservices. So no longer is technology monolithic, because monolithic takes time. And when we look at really what we can do to democratize, India is a country in a hurry, right? And we want to achieve all our dreams tomorrow. It's not for the next generation, right? It's for us. So which means that we need agility, we need pace, we need to drive change when we want it. When the market is ripe, right? You don't want to take 2 years to get there. When I hear about digital payments systems in most other countries, it takes sometimes $1 billion and 2 to 3 years to get a real-time payment system up and running. I think by that time we've gone through like 4-5 cycles of innovation here in India. So all that comes from the way technology can support that agility, right? So and that's where we've got microservices, and really even at NPCI we look at this from the context of a tech radar. Tech radar is to say that there is always a watch out for what's happening on the technology front. What can you do with it? How do you experiment with it? How do you put very early technology into a test bed, start learning the ropes? So by the time it matures a bit, you're ready to actually start deploying it. So you can be there, not necessarily at the very early stage, but you can really get into utilizing technology very early in its life cycle. And the time has probably come actually, for India to also be a contributor into all of this. So, we tend to be users of open source, and I'm sure many of you are on GitHub and several platforms like that. But when do we start contributing, right? How do we also create and give back to this this world in a way that supports this democratization mechanism that we are speaking about. So, and all of that is sort of playing out in the tech world. And algorithms, needless to say, right? After the chat GPT world, it's all about AI and algorithms. So whoever's not been on it has immediately jumped into the bandwagon. And needless to say, while of course there's a lot of fear and concern and meaningful AI, and we need to understand it and we need to control it, and all that stuff is happening on one side. But at a very basic level, it's going to be extremely useful and helpful to us, right? So we need to just focus on that and get there. And when we look at the evolution, evolution is sort of to say what really is happening in this world of digitization. How does one manage change? And there again, I think at a more framework level, it's about core digitization. But when we look further, it's looking at nodes of evolution and looking at evolution in a very networked environment, which is not necessarily controlled at the center. And for people in an innovation network to drive change at different pace that they need to. I don't think we're really there yet, so it's a bit utopian, but I think that's really where we need to go to really drive this evolution and change, which can also be democratized. But blockchain is something that everyone is playing with. Reserve Bank of India has already started its pilot with the digital bank currency, which really takes fiat currency as we know it and puts it on a blockchain kind of a framework. And there are a number of use cases. I'm sure all of you know enough about that. So really this whole evolution concept is something that, again, is going to drive a lot of that democratization. And really, what are the business drivers, right? So when you look at business drivers at a very basic level, digitization is supposed to be about efficiency, reducing the cost per transaction, bringing it from dollars per transaction to rupees per transaction to paisa per transaction, and that's really the big game. How do we really drive cost and efficiency, hyper automation? And today I keep complaining that I think even in the fintech world, in the banking world, the operational systems, are still somewhere stuck in time. Those processes are still fairly manual, file-based, and so on. So while the front end has become all cool and sexy and digital and things like that, I think we've not really bothered too much about the back end. We move that at a much slower pace than we move the front end, which is okay, but it still needs to catch up. And that's where automation plays a very important role. But when we look at the driver of democratization, it has to be differentiation. Again, I think Dr. Patra said, don't compare. That's okay. As individuals, we don't have to compare. But organizations have to compare, right? I mean, why will your customer choose service A versus service B if it's not better in some way that's meaningful to them? So differentiation is the key. And how do you really democratize while still differentiating is going to be very important, because from this comes market making, Otherwise, we'll all commoditize everything that we use, and there'll be no excitement left in the game there. So differentiation, creation of economic value, making it matter to the customer is going to be very important. And when I look at, for example, we spoke about languages some time back, and we're doing some work with the Bharat for AI group at IIT Madras. On the Bhashini project, which is really to say, how do we bring conversational payments? How do we address all the various languages in the country? And, can we bring them back on payment rails? I think those kind of drivers, which bring technology, which bring AI, and which actually make business sense, start creating a lot of value there. So I thought I'll kind of close with an example that we all know, and sort of speak through that to talk about this whole concept of democratization. Which is, so this is really the Jandan Aadhaar mobile, we know about it. But the challenge here sometimes is also the users, right? Everyone has a bank account, everyone has a mobile phone, everyone has an Aadhaar. But is the Aadhaar account updated with the mobile phone? Is the bank account updated with the mobile phone? For example, going back to UPI, we are very excited that we can now onboard customers using Aadhaar. So till now, it has been only using debit cards. And we said, look, I think we've reached the point when the debit card market has already started using UPI. The next swath of customers comes from these customers who are all Aadhaar oriented, right? But for that, it's very important that the customer's own telephone number is there in the bank account, own telephone number is there, updated with UDI for Aadhaar, and these are some friction points that still exist. So basically, the framework is there, but some of the elements of how these services can be used, what needs to be done to use them, so the whole awareness cycle around that, and then slowly starting to give back control over data to the customers. And that's what the AA framework is doing right now. So customers can give consent to say, hey, my data from this and this and this and this service provider of mine can be utilized by this user to either consolidate my statement, giving me investment advice, whatever have you, right? So a lot of innovation that's going to be happening there because we've sort of put that power back in the hand of the customer. And yeah, I think the Jan-Dhan has been one of the most successful schemes. Overall has created the framework for digitization and the foundation for democratization in the country. And I thought I'll kind of close with this, So this is the first time I drew it, it was a pyramid. And I said for us to say that it is democratization, it should not be a pyramid, right? It should be like this nice rectangle where everybody has access to all layers. And this has to be seen with a lens of time. So at one point, I think it was to say, look, we've got these bank accounts, we've got Aadhaar, we've got the mobile phones, and so UPI could happen on those rails. And at this point in time, we've got UPI, and there are players who are building fantastic engagement opportunity on the back of UPI with very high affinity, right? And I've heard it from everybody today, whether it is bankers or fintechs, to say, if somebody's using UPI, and if I can get them to use UPI with me, either as a bank or an app, then I really hold that customer's loyalty. And that's what affinity is about, and that's what trust building is about. And payment is a very high frequency transaction, right? And that's where that sits. So there's a lot happening in that space. And on the back of that, right? And now if you say UPI is digitized and, this engagement layer is the democratization. And now if we say, hey, this is now the digitization layer, we take this for granted. And then the next, sort of summit to be cracked will really be credit. We are still a underpenetrated country when it comes to credit. We hardly have about 5-6% penetration of credit cards. If you go all the way to microfinance, we're still talking about 10-12%. Amongst the lowest penetration, even in the emerging world, is really where we are when it comes to credit. So I'm hoping that really that's the sort of next big piece that we are able to democratize on the back of everything we've done with digitization so far. So that's it, and thank you very much. Lovely being here. I look forward to catching up, and thank you, Dr. Batra, for the event.